It is the Brad and John show. We kick off another week. You know what? John, right off the get-go, I got to ask you this. We forgot to talk about this. Are you here the entire week? We here Monday through Friday?
Absolutely.
Okay, the reason I ask that is because being out and about like I am, there's so many interesting places where you go like, we won't be open on Friday. Matter of fact, I saw this for the St. Charles Chamber of Commerce that they are shutting down their operations as of Thursday. They will be working from home next week, so don't call the office.
Which means they will be napping.
Yeah, or which means they'll be out shopping or they'll be out partying or something like that, So if you're going to come by the office next week, don't give them a call first and see if someone's in the office, and they won't be back until January 5th. And I'm going like, come on. Does anybody work anymore?
Absolutely not. And remember, this began before the pandemic. I mean, some places, I mentioned this last week, but at Monsanto, we were closed down between Christmas break and New Year's. Like, the offices were physically closed. The gate was up. You couldn't come in. You couldn't work.
Now, what if they're like for you as a comms guy? Let's say on the 28th of December, a couple days after Christmas, some big thing hit. Did you just go, I'm off. I'm not going to worry about it. No, something that you had to address in the public media.
Yeah, we had a great system set up whereby one of the members of the team every day was responsible for checking the media line. So a call would come into world headquarters somewhere, which was in St. Louis, and somebody was responsible for getting the voicemail messages or the emails. And it was broken up through. It was a division of labor throughout the break. And remember, there are other parts of the world that don't shut down. So, for example, folks in China that worked for Monsanto would be working all over break. You couldn't get to them for the 2 weeks of Chinese New Year, though.
Really?
So we would cover for them during Chinese New Year. So
they would shut down.
It's just a world monstrosity of a setup.
They would shut down operations during Chinese New Year then?
Yeah, absolutely. And the team that for example, if you work for Bayer or any other really large company, your employees in China are generally off for about 2 weeks for Chinese New Year. Yeah, the whole country shuts down. Their stock market shuts down. Everything shuts down.
Really?
It's a BFD over there.
Wow. Okay,
yeah.
For those of you who may be new to the show, this is something that good radio people do, and I'm not saying that we're good radio people, but there's the assumption that everybody knows who he is and who I am and what we do here in the whole bit, because we're getting new listeners every day with the new format and that stuff. John Combest, first off, is a North County boy, grew up in North County, went to the Hazelwood school system. What grade school did you go to?
I went to Larimore Elementary, and then I went to Kirby, where Brad's mom worked and where Brad worked.
Yeah, matter of fact, I got a feeling my mom was working when you were there, believe it or not.
Was she really?
Oh, yeah.
I was there in 90 through 92.
I believe she was still there.
No way. In the library?
Yeah. I believe she was still there. Yeah. My mom and dad were both very prolific college people. My dad, we lost track of how many degrees my dad had, literally, because of the fact that, actually, it's sort of an interesting story. It's sort of a sad story. My dad was the first son of a husband and wife, and his father left him when he was 2 years old. And then his mother remarried, and she had 2 more kids. So my dad was the typical stepchild. I don't know if that's true or not anymore. He was not treated very well, and even to the point where his mother, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, as a kid, when we went over to my grandmother's house, she was Miss Negative. And let me put it to you this way. She was Miss Negative about college. Now, things have come full circle because I'm sort of negative about college. But she would always, when we went there, she would always make a point of telling us how she felt that her son, Lee, my father, was a failure because he went to college and he got a job, and once again, he got a job as an engineer. My dad was a civil engineer. Yeah. So, in other words, not an easy degree to get. He always had great jobs. At one point in time, I don't know if you ever told this or not, I think it was his 3rd or 4th job, he actually was the city engineer for the city of Bridgeton. And
wow, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. And then he spent the last 25, 26 years of his career, he was the campus civil engineer for SIU Edwardsville. For a while, he was both. He did both campuses and go back and forth between Carbondale and Edwardsville, but then they hired somebody down there in Carbondale. And to this day, if you drive through through SIU Edwardsville, a lot of the infrastructure there is my dad's design. A lot of
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah, parking lots and roads and stuff like that. And matter of fact, you know what was really cool? He did a thing, and he would never really talk much about this. My dad was a very quiet man. World War II vet, spent 3 years in World War II, then stayed actually 4 years, then stayed in the Army as a reservist for 36 years. He retired when he was 62. We didn't even know that. We didn't know that till he passed away.
Wow.
That he retired at 62. But the last couple of years there, he did some interesting things. And one of the things he did was he had a relationship with several professors over there who were like in the engineering department, stuff like that. And he did, I guess you'd call it like a practicum. And they did it for high school kids, where they would teach high school kids, I think this was with the Edwardsville School District, they would teach high school kids the practical aspect of civil engineering. I don't know why they did this, but this is what they did. And my dad would go out in the woods, because if you know the SIU campus, it's monstrous. It's like, physically, it's like one of the top 5 largest campuses of any college or university in the country. I don't know if you knew that or not, because
No.
it's I have to look it up. It's like thousands of acres. It may be like 5,000 or 6,000 acres. Anyway, they would find places like where ravines and things like that, where people would want to go like nature hiking and things like that, but it was tough because you had to go down like a dry creek bed and come up the other side. And they would put in natural bridges where they would go back in the woods, and my dad would work with the kids, and they'd figure out where they could chop down a tree and have it fall across the ravine, and then they'd chop down another tree, and then they'd get up there and they'd put, I'm thinking to myself, nowadays, this was back, early 90s. And I'm thinking nowadays, there's no way they would do that, because we're not going to let our kids use power tools. We're not.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like something from the Boxcar Children series. Using a tree to cross a river.
Right. It wasn't a river. It was like a dry creek bed. Anyway, how did I get up on that? My dad.
We're talking about North County. We were doing introductions.
Well, my dad had all these degrees because as a full-time faculty, he'd take classes for free. We think he ended up with 3 different degrees from SIU. And it was sort of interesting because he was an engineer. Then he got into art. And at one point in time, he did some works of art that actually were displayed as student projects, which was like all over the St. Louis area. They got curated, and a couple of his things ended up in a display, like a showing at the St. Louis Art Museum.
Oh wow! As a student.
Yes, as a student. Anyway. John is a North County guy, went to WashU, just like my parents did. Then he worked for, he calls it your brief political career, right? Who'd you work for again?
I usually describe it as a brief and undistinguished political career. I worked for Senator John Ashcroft. I worked in the Secretary of State's office under a guy named Matt Blunt, who became governor. And then I went to work for a PR firm, and then I went to work for Monsanto, and then eventually Bayer.
What did you do when you were at SOS?
I did paperwork filings, like the most mundane paperwork that you could imagine. And the best thing about that job is that at 5:01 p.m. I was done.
Well,
you clock out of the office and there's no way for anyone to read. There's no work to be done. You can't do any work if you're not sitting there with the paperwork. So yeah, it was fun. It was great people. I loved it.
Dude, I've been to Jefferson City. I would say more like 4:59. They're done. I don't think
4:59 Eastern time.
Or if you go to the license bureau, it's 4:30. But so did you do like corporate filings and stuff like that? Or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, worked with law firms would come in and bring in all their. I got to be pretty familiar with LLC paperwork and nonprofit organizations and all that stuff. And everybody would come in asking for a business license, and we had to explain to them that this is not where you get your business license. It's not where you get your tax ID number. And I also learned the value of one of my favorite customer service phrases, Brad, which was people would come in and lack their paperwork, and they would start their sentences with, "What had happened is." So the reason why they didn't have their $105 filing fee or their driver's license or the paperwork is, what had happened is I was staying at my aunt's house and she lost the paperwork and I don't have my driver's license. So a lot of times I'll start sentences with, what had happened is, if I'm describing a short
So
time.
were you the nasty employee that said, well, I'm sorry, we can't help you. Come back later.
I would usually let senior employees handle a little bit more of the bad cop stuff, and I would play good cop a lot of the times actually, and let them know, hey, I understand that you don't have this or that, but what you should do is go down to the DMV, make sure you have your license, make sure you have, and there were hijinks. People would come in with obviously fake paperwork and things like that.
Really,
and,
really fake paperwork? Like what did they fake? What did they bring in that was fake?
Well, for example, our office processed a number of LLC applications that ended up being part of immigration. So folks would come in, this without getting too far into the weeds, there's a lot of times people will set up fake LLCs under fake names in order to say that they're, say, a trucking company. And then if they're a fake trucking company, then they can give illegal immigrants, they could show that illegal immigrants actually work for this fake trucking company. This was a case that came through the Secretary of State's office around that period of time. But people would forge signatures. People will do anything to create a legal entity if they need it as a cover for something.
There's a topic all in itself. You talk about forging signatures. I guess I'm amazed at how things have gotten to the point where you can doc sign everything, and you know what I mean. And not only that, here's the question I've asked my teacher friends, and I've yet to get an answer, which is sort of interesting. Most of the school districts have gotten rid of cursive.
Yes.
How do you have a signature anymore?
Yeah, you really can't. And there's a hearty debate on this, and I have friends who insist that cursive is useless. I just had this conversation last week, Brad, and I told a friend of mine, I said, absolutely not. Cursive, you have to be able to sign your name. Like, there's some value in writing. And I know that I sound like a proverbial typewriter repairman that says, in my day, everybody had to write cursive. But you need to learn to write.
Well, here's the crazy thing for me. For forever and ever and ever, I have done printing, and part of the reason was for that is, and you're going to find this very strange, but back in my early years when I was getting my ham radio license, it used to be that to get your ham radio license, you have to be able to send and receive Morse code. Mm-hmm. And the basic license, which at the time they don't do anymore, was called the novice license, and all you had to do was get 5 words per minute of code, okay? And which was pretty slow. But the next license up, which was called the general, you had to do 13 words per minute, which is pretty fast. And I was struggling with it. And a friend of mine in high school who had already gotten, matter of fact, he had the top of the line license, had what called it extra, which you had to do 20 words per minute for Morse code. He saw me struggling and he says, no, let me show you how to print. So he had this method of speed printing. And, in other words, to the point where when you'd listen to the Morse code, you put on the headphones, you have a speaker, and the tape, whatever it was, the tape would run. Like when you took the test, you'd wear these little headphones, and you had to, write down what the Morse code was sending, and then you turned that in. But you had to, you couldn't spend a long time, making your letters look perfectly. So he would show me things like, okay, this is how you do an E. You do like a half circle with a line coming out of the middle, instead of like doing the that kind of stuff. So I sort of adopted that, and that's pretty much what I do all the time. Matter of fact, I'm looking down. That's what I've written here in front of me. But still, the cursive thing, my signature is my name, just Brad, B-R-A-D. I handwrite it. That's my signature.
Wow.
Literally.
So it's kind of like, are you saying that you do like the share thing where you're just Brad? You're not Brad Hildebrand?
My signature is B-R-A-D. Matter of fact, if you have any money on you right now, do you have access to money right now?
Have it about 6 feet away. Yeah.
Okay, here. I'm going to pull some money out of my pocket, okay? I will show you something interesting. The guy who was let me see if I can find one that's got on it. The guy who was the Secretary of
the
Treasury under Trump, Steve Mnuchin.
Yeah.
If you look at his signature on the currency when he was there, when he was Secretary of Treasury, it is block printing. It's not a signature. It's
No way.
Yeah. Take a look at it. When you're
I just Googled it and it's coming up. You're right, Stephen T. Mnuchin. That's how we signed it.
Yes,
Look at that.
It's just block printing, which
Well, that's easier to read. That's for sure. That's educational, right?
most of the signatures you can't read, especially if you go to the doctor and you get a prescription from the doctor. Tell me you can read his signature.
Oh, absolutely not. I have a great signature story when we have time, and I was thinking about it yesterday, Brad. It was about when I was in, very quickly, I worked in the U.S. Capitol, which came to light, which has been in the center because of what's been going on in the Capitol building by staffers.
Yes, we'll talk about that.
One of my tasks was to go around, and I worked for the House Committee on Small Business, and would go around to members' offices and have guys and gals that had co-sponsored legislation. You know how you see like copies of legislation with their signature?
Right.
Nobody actually signed it. So it was all signed by their secretaries. And one time I went in to get a member to sign this piece of legislation, and it was the only time that a member actually signed it. And he was right around the corner, and I heard his staffer, he said to his staffer, "What is this?" And his staffer said verbatim, "It's good, just sign it." And the member of Congress signed it. And I said, first of all, I was amazed because I was like, holy cow, I was in charge of getting like 60 people to sign this legislation. I'm like, a member of Congress actually signed this instead of their admin, But the description of "it's good, just sign it" was my favorite anecdote.
That goes to show you the people you elect are not necessarily the people pulling the strings in Congress.
Have
right?
no idea. The man had no idea what this legislation was or why his name was on it.
Okay, I want to talk about something real quick. We're getting up near a break here, but for a minute, we try to keep things local, is what we're trying to talk about. The Collier County, so to speak, Westplex area, even Franklin and Warren counties to a certain extent. Okay. The deal with Hunter Biden. He shows up last week. He's supposed to be behind closed doors. He's supposed to be essentially deposed behind closed doors. He shows up. He doesn't show up at the entrance of the Capitol, to the Congress. He shows up at the entrance of the Senate, and he does a press conference where essentially he says he's being mistreated and stuff like that. So in other words, what he did was he committed contempt of Congress. Now, if you know what contempt is in a legal legal parlance, if you have a judge that tells you to do something and you don't do it. Let's say you're in court, and matter of fact, if you watch, what's the movie, My Cousin Vinny, which is actually a pretty funny movie. There's contempt of court in there. But the idea being is if you are in contempt of court, the judge can literally throw you in jail. If you're in court, he can say, bailiff, handcuff that person and put them in jail and let them spend a week there, and then we'll come out and talk about this again. Okay? So the interesting thing was they said that, and I was listening to this over the weekend, they said that he is in contempt of Congress. But the problem is the person or the organization that has to depose him or has to enforce the contempt, which essentially is either physically grab him and make him show up for Congress or throw him in jail, is the Justice Department. And because the Justice Department is now run by Democrats, they're not going to do that. But the interesting thing is, remember, when he went before that judge in Delaware and she blew up that plea deal, she told him there were terms that he was essentially being let go on his own recognizance because he pled not guilty and he didn't have to post a cash bail. But she told them certain things, and she said he must get a job. Remember that? I thought that was funny. He must get a job. Yeah, right. Like Hunter's going to get a job, right? And the deal is, all the Republicans would have to do was just go back to that judge and say, and one of the circumstances, one of the criteria she put on him was that he not violate any laws. So in other words,
violating contempt of court is violating a law.
Exactly. So she should just, get back in court this morning and say, okay, issue a warrant for Hunter Biden to be thrown.
Now, the likelihood that actually happens.
That'll never happen.
What are the chances someone follows the letter of the law,
But
Brad?
The problem is, if you and I did that kind of stuff,
of course,
absolutely, we'd be in the Gray Bar Hotel. You know what I'm saying?
And not Gray Bar, the local corporation.
Right.
You mean the other Gray Bar?
Yes, the Gray Bar Hotel. Commonly known as the Clink, the Joint, whatever you want to call it. Okay, we have to take a break. It is Brad and John. You can check out our website. It is up and running. John's even made some posts on it. Well, not some posts. He's fixed his about page.
I got fixed, Brad. People have been waiting for that for years. When's John going to get fixed? I got fixed.
I could make a comment, but I
You
won't.
could. Don't, Brad. Not with the FCC listening.
Yeah, bjshow.co, bjshow.co. No M on it. We couldn't afford the M. bjshow.co. It's 7:22.